Major funding for these broadcasts has been provided by grants from Madison Realty Capital, New York Community Bank, M&T Bank, AmTrust Title, Customers Bank, Ariel Property Advisors, Capital One Bank, Sterling National Bank, Marks Paneth LLP, Meridian Capital Group. Additional funding has been provided by grants from Amarant Bank, AVR Realty Company, Bank of America Merrill Lynch, Briarwood Organization, B6 Real Estate Advisors, CBRE, Chase Commercial Term Lending, Chase Mortgage Lending, Citizens Bank, Collins Building Services, CPEX Real Estate Services, Douglaston Development, Levine Builders, Flushing Bank, Friedman LLP, Handro Properties Handler Real Estate Organization, Hodges Ward Elliott INC, Investors Bank, James D. Kuhn Real Estate Institute at Syracuse University, John Cassimatidis Red Apple Group, Kilroy Architectural Windows, Matone Group, Newmark Knight Frank, Optimum Window Manufacturing Corp., People's United Bank, Rockefeller Group, Rosewood Realty Group, RPW Group, SJP Properties, Stonehenge NYC, TD Bank, Terra CRG, the Merringore Family Foundation, and these friends. So, Crystal Apple, that you sit over there, what is the outlook for 2019? We're into an administration that's 2 years old. We have other changes over there. We hear about Amazon coming to New York. We know that tech companies are over here. So what's happening in the general area? So today I've assembled 3 individuals to provide their insight on the entire market. My guests include Michael Giulio, who's the Chief Financial Officer at the Kaufman Organization, Jeff Levine, who is the chairman and founder of Douglaston Development, Levine Builders, and needless to say, Clinton Management. And last but not least, a man who's been heavily involved in Westchester and New York City recently, Robert Wise, who's the chairman and CEO of the RPW Group. How do you see 2019? You've seen cycles, you've seen good periods, and unfortunately many of your properties at certain times were completed right before a cycle. Are we in a cycle today?
Well, I believe that we are at a transition point. I am somewhat pessimistic in terms of finding opportunities right now. If you go back to the end of 15, when the 421A tax abatement expired, you had a rush to the market. People who had land and financing was available were able to go into the ground in late 15 to grandfather their foundations and build their jobs out in 17 and 18. And that, coupled with the rezonings that occurred both in Long Island City and downtown Brooklyn, among other areas, led to an abundance of new product hitting the market. And for a brief period, you have been seeing too much residential product, forcing us all to get into the rent abatement game to lease up these new products. That's the bad news. The good news is that with the expiration of 421A at that time, coupled with the lack of tax abatement program to mask over the excessive taxes that are charged to new residential projects in the 5 boroughs, you had a situation where land was not available for rental housing because everybody in that same period worshiped the god of condos, and land sold for $600,000, $700,000, $800,000 a foot for condos, which obviously won't lend itself very well to rentals, especially without tax abatement. The new Affordable New York tax abatement came out, and frankly speaking, it doesn't work because land has not come back to earth. Well, it stopped selling because condos stopped selling. You can't buy land upon which to do a resi rental. That, coupled with the high price of condos out there, makes what resi rental product that you have out there very valuable. Millennials are renting, not buying. So if you can pencil out resi rentals here in New York City, near transportation, I think you could have greater success, but it's hard to find land for that purpose.
So relating that question, we have Robert, who has owned over the past 25, 30 years a lot of property up in Westchester. Westchester's changing. People are commuting from Westchester into New York City because the rents are less expensive and because of some amenities of a different type of living. Let's talk about you, who are taking some of your property and planning to make it rental.
Well, in reality, we are not taking existing properties and making them rental.
You're taking some land.
We are taking land. The office buildings that we have an average of 95% tenancy, so the rental market is very strong. And in the last few years, most municipalities in Westchester have changed their zoning, allowing residential where before was not allowed. So as a result of that, right now, there are between 5,000 and 10,000 units, or under construction, or on the drawing board. And out of that, we have 500 in 2 of our projects. And that's not the only change. There's been some retail as well that has been incorporated to the zoning. So where there was only office buildings, now it's going to be a mixture of residential, retail, and related uses.
But my question is this: is it truly transit oriented? You know, the term, like Jeff has Williamsburg, the Edge, and North 6th Street and other property, which had the L train, the G train, and the ferry. Your property up in Westchester, the land, is not, it's not actually near the train. It's a 10-minute ride via a shuttle, via somebody parking, if you can get parking in the area. What do you see as, with regard to the differential of charging rents in the Westchester property compared to what Jeff needs to get in rents on the Ulm 2, let's say?
Well, frankly, I don't know what the differential will be, but I think what we need to realize is that different markets have different characteristics. And even though Westchester is extremely close to Manhattan, it's a different environment. It's suburbia. It's probably faster to get from White Plains to Grand Central than to get from certainly parts of Brooklyn to Midtown. So time-wise, which is where we really now count for millennials, is very short. The style of life, the quality of life of the suburbs offers different characteristics altogether. So unless you want to be in the downtown of some of the largest cities in Westchester, most of the development is in the surrounding areas. We are talking about 10 minutes of a shuttle ride to the train station. That is we find it perfectly acceptable. There is a very large demand for that. And what comes with it comes greenery, comes golf courses. One of our sites is facing a golf course. From a location point of view, we are at the intersection of 287 and the Hutchinson River Parkway, which for Westchester is being at the corner of 42nd and 5th. So that's the heart of the town. So we are very close to several trains, several downtowns, and at the same time you get the quality of life that the suburbia allows.
You've never built up in Westchester. Have you ever looked at the Westchester market or the Stamford market?
I have looked at it. I find that for the type of product that I built, which is typically poured in place mid or high-rise buildings, that the numbers haven't penciled out as well. I think they can pencil out more favorably in a lower density, lower rise building, similar to the stick and brick on top of a masonry fireproof parking type structure. But again, that's not my expertise. I have built that way out west, because it is so much more cost effective and you can achieve success at lower rents using that lower cost of construction. But for the moment, I like the poured-in-place high-rise business here in the boroughs.
Michael, you're predominantly in the office buildings. You have the Penn Station properties, then you have the Flatiron District, and then you have the Long Island City, this one-off new property. How do you see the market?
So in each one of those areas, I think we're dealing with three separate submarkets. I think Long Island City being sort of a wild card. We've never invested there before other than the California Astoria Studios, which have done very well, and it's separate and distinct, and it's a different area in a different business line. But the Madison Square portfolio is different than the core portfolio, and our principals compare that every day. When we look at the details of the differences in the rental values alone, and we look at the details differently from an exposure standpoint, meaning to say, I think we're more likely to rent at higher rents in the Madison Square type Flatiron District portfolio than we would be in the core properties in the 7th Avenue area with the side street buildings.
But you know, you were saying before, and we had a discussion in the green room, that, I mean, you're right at Penn Station at 457th Avenue.
And that's improving every day.
Of why people want to be in the Grand Central as opposed to the Penn Station.
Well, I think there the question is really more of the difference of Madison Avenue versus 7th Avenue. There's a very different vibe, there's a very different feel on Madison Avenue than there is on 7th Avenue. 7th Avenue, you've got foot traffic. I don't know if you've noticed that, but they've opened the lane, the right lane of the street on 7th Avenue so that it's closed off with the police blocks so that the transportation, the people who are walking, the pedestrians, are actually given an extra lane because it's so heavy there. So as desirable it is because of the fact that it's close to Penn Station, it's not quite desirable when you walk out of the building at the end of the day and you could get run down for people running for their trains. They actually had to widen the road to double the width. So there are things that go on in the area that you think about that only as a consumer of the product in the area. And we're both consumers and owners of that building. We manage the building. So we look at it from two different perspectives all the time.
Let's talk about the conversion in Long Island City.
So that's a process that will take a period of time. I would say 18 months was our original timeline, and we're right on our timeline. Are we able to deliver the product? Yes, we can deliver the product. What will the market be? You've asked the apple at the very beginning of the conversation. Nobody really knows. We're hopeful. Jeff mentioned earlier that, you know, with regard to who's coming to the area, who are the new tenants that we bet on, we didn't know at the time that some of the newer tenants, the larger tenants that were coming to the area, when we purchased the building, the ground lease there, but we found out that they were coming, Amazon was coming, and it was a big plus, and we could do well with 60,000 square feet. So we're a small fish in a big pond out there, kind of experimenting with what we'll do with the Long Island City market. It's 3 floors, it's 20,000 a floor, it's by transportation. So we think we have a good game plan there for maybe a single user tenant, or if we want to divide it into 3 floors. So,
where do all three of you see the greatest opportunity in your mind with regard to New York City?
By the next few years, I think the rezoning of Midtown East is going to have a very dramatic impact. We see it with One Vanderbilt, we see it with the Chase building, and now we see it
with the Grand Hyatt. Right?
With the Grand Hyatt. And so in the past few years, Hudson Yards has been a vacuum cleaner to the rest of the city in terms of very large block of space. There is a limit to everything, and there is also a taste to be there. It's not for everybody. And we think that Grand Central is Grand Central. That's not going to ever change. So in our point of view, we want to concentrate in that market, and we want to concentrate in B buildings that will allow us the flexibility of having smaller spaces and a variety of tenants.
How do you look at co-working?
Co-working it's a challenge. It obviously has been an evolution that I don't think most of us expected. And I still think that the future is uncertain. It has made a very dramatic impact, and I think it has some positive consequences. The amenities that we offer in our buildings, in some cases, were driven by what the co-working space has offered. And
that's your Westchester portfolio.
That's Westchester, and it started to happen in New York City as well. You see now pool rooms, and you see all kind of things that before were not available in office buildings. And that was, I would say, in
but
good
I'm
part,
going to ask the two of you, because you're both landlords. As landlord owners, when a co-working company, be it a WeWork, be it a Yard, or one of these other companies, the industrious, comes to you and says, I want to rent space, are you there for welcome arms, or are you conservative in saying, I don't like this limited liability company who has no real background, and if they go bankrupt, I'm going to have vacant space?
Well, we have one in our building that has been there for the past 20 years. And we have several in Westchester as well. We think in the right size, and the right size varies according to the buildings, it can become an amenity to your building.
I was at a company called Virgo, who was the traditional office share suites, okay? I walked the space last week on 1345 Avenue of the Americas, and it was a normal space, not people running around to the offices. People were in their offices. There were certain midsections, but there were no telephone booths or something like that. How do you at Kaufman look?
So the answer to that is we are more conservative. We look at the deal that they're presenting as a co-working space, and we look at the other deals that were being offered in the building. And there's a comparison. And then we take a look at what we've got in vacant space, and we determine whether or not we'd like to lease it in one foul swoop. As the case, one of our buildings that had a building within a building with two separate entrances for two major tenants was the 119 building, 119 West 24th Street, and New York City Alley, talk about millennials, for younger people, became a tenant in our building, and we accepted them, and it's working out very well for us in that building. We look at each one on a case-by-case basis, right? Because each one of these companies could be very different in terms of their balance sheets, the type of people they bring to it. But if it fills the void and it pays the rent, there you are, operating, and you have net operating income, and you add a different vibe to your building also if you have the second entrance, if you have a building.
That's a separate entrance because your elevators are not being taken over by the co-working company.
Correct.
In a similar manner to both, I'm going to pose the question to both Jeff and to Robert with regard to co-living, which has become a semi-phenomena. How do you look at that with regard to the OHM, one of your own properties, and the OHM 2, and your own thoughts if you would want co-living to be over there because you may get higher rents? What do you see?
Well, obviously, co-living is something which needs to be designed and anticipated. We've had in the past designed shared splits where in conjunction with New York City rent stabilization regulations, we could effectively have an apartment shared by 2 or 3 individuals where they in fact had one responsible party on the lease, and we maintained all requirements as associated with the laws. Obviously, where you violate those laws, you potentially have a great problem. I think that buildings that are designed with individual apartment leases don't lend themselves as well to co-living, whether it be because of tax abatement and rent regulation. These newer developments where, similar to the dormitories which we built for the School of Visual Arts at New York University, where you design a shared space with a shared kitchen, very often ensuite bathrooms, those work well.
I'm looking at the two of you. Yeah. Who are both planning to build over the next couple of years residential housing. It is true that under a co-living arrangement, the person is paying less rent than they would be paying if they share the apartment in most instances. The only question is you may have 3 or 4 people within that apartment who are renting one room for a bedroom, which could be 80 to 100 square feet, and they're sharing the common facility. How do you perceive it? Because I would tell you the banks have a mixed emotion. They're not sure of it today. They like the fact that, tell me what the rent's supposed to be with 2 people. Don't tell me what the rent is going to be with 4 people.
Well, obviously, you have to skirt regulations in existing buildings to put in multiple
I'm talking
tenants.
about new buildings.
Going forward, it's not something that I am designing and building for. I build regulated apartments for the most part, take advantage of tax abatements. Frankly speaking, I have been approached by a number of these shared housing, whether it's We Live or Common or you name it, and they want to redesign these buildings to satisfy the needs of their program. But I don't think they have the sophistication of development experience that understand that today to build without tax abatement, without the affordable component, because typically you do have to comply with those regulations, it's very difficult to achieve the numbers. Yes, you can get more money renting on a per square foot basis in a shared space, but I don't think you can satisfy the requirements of New York's tax requirements today in that fashion. So I think it's very difficult.
But you bring up a comment that I haven't posed to Robert with regard to tax abatements or opportunities for building rental. Will you get any tax opportunities, a pilot program, lower taxes, building residential rentals?
Yes. Yeah, we usually the IDA offers a package that includes a reduction on non-pay sales tax on all the materials you buy for construction. You get a pilot, and usually you get some help on the mortgage tax. Okay. That's pretty much the package. And in reference to co-living space, what we are doing is work-live space, which is residential buildings within a corporate campus, which is frankly a new concept. And I don't know if there is any other within the region where residential buildings are on the same site than an office building. There's a number of benefits. One is you share parking, you share some of the amenities, and if you work in the office building and you can live on the same site, it also has a tremendous advantage. The key is to make it work, to make sure that the residential portion of the project feels like a residential separate entity and you are not living in an office building.
What's your thoughts today with regard to senior living in Westchester and senior living in New York City?
Well, I can't speak for New York City, but in Westchester, senior living, it has a tremendous demand. The problem is to find sites, and it's for obvious reasons. Most people in Westchester 30 years ago, they got to their 60s and they all went to Florida. Now, practically nobody moves out of the area because people in their 60s are extremely active in their 70s and 80s. Children and grandchildren are in the area, so the demand is great. The cities and towns love it because it doesn't put any impact on the school district.
Right.
So there are a lot of benefits. But the reality is that millennials have very few children as well. So it's less of a concern than it used to be. The schools got very nervous when they would see a large project and think, okay, we're going to get another 30, 40 kids. Each kid costs us $15,000, $20,000. Not anymore. Most millennials have no children until very late.
Jeff, not with regard to that, not the affordable that you did in Staten Island. I'm talking market rate.
Well, as you know, we do multifamily market rate. We do multifamily affordable through subsidies with the various city agencies, and we have built assisted and independent living for seniors. We did it in New York years ago, primarily in the other boroughs. I don't say the outer boroughs because Claire Schulman, president of Queens, used to harass me for that. But in the Bronx and in Queens, we built with Atria senior housing. We don't do it in New York City anymore because we find the cost, along with the taxation, is prohibitive. We have built a business out in Phoenix, Arizona, where we have built hundreds of independent assisted living units, which we own and operate. And again, the baby boom, which is the generation which has defined their economic times for our lifetimes, is now getting into their 70s. If you were born in 45, you're now approaching, 75 years old. Senior living, because people are aging in better health, is not generally required till the 80s, believe it or not, today. So that boom is still coming. It is not here yet, but it is getting here, so you best be prepared for it. In New York City itself, I have to say, there is a trend towards uber luxury, very expensive senior living.
But the new one on 2nd Avenue and 94th Street, I was with a banker, and they told me that the studios are renting for $16,000 a month. So if a studio is $16,000 over there, a one-bedroom was $21,000. So they are for the uber wealthier people.
So for the poorer people, as you referred to the atria, I happen to be looking for an atria for my mother, and I'm pricing these things out. Go to Ronkonkoma, you can get in there for $4,500 for a one-bedroom for one person. Right. Go to Great Neck, the atria in Great Neck will give you $6,500. If you want a stove in the room, it's another $5,000. You know, it's pricey, and when you think about how expensive it is and what a demand there is for it, it's an interesting metric. And when you said I think you said it became not affordable to build.
Well, in other words, the market, look,
all of the constraint.
When you talk about $18,000 to $20,000 per month for a senior in a residence in Manhattan with the services, yes, there are some people who can afford that. But like a Bentley or Rolls Royce, there's a limited number of people who can afford that, and that's not a market that I choose to be in.
So all I can say is my apple over there, my crystal apple, seems bright and potentially shiny for the outcome. But as Robert says, we're not talking 2019, we're talking a couple of years. And hopefully in a couple of years, even shorter time, we'll all come back. I'd like to thank Michael, Jeffrey, and Robert, and I'll see you next week.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you.